Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this public forum. I really appreciate all of you taking the time on this kind of blustery, almost winter day to come to this. My name is Steve Smith. I am the Vice Provost for Information Technology and Chief Information Officer for the University of Nevada, Reno. Also, and the reason I'm kicking this off is I'm chair of our Information Communication Technology Committee, a campus-wide committee that looks at accessibility for all of our technology across the campus. So we are going to go through, I'm going to give you a brief kind of 50,000-foot flyby of some of the things that have brought us here today, some of the things we're working on, and then my colleagues here to my left will get into more detail on some of the areas that we're working on to ensure that our online technology is accessible to all. And then we really want to open this up for questions. We are videotaping this entire forum, and we hope to have that online and available for streaming in a couple of days. There is an accessibility website on the university web pages, and that's where the link will be for folks that want to get the video streaming effort for this. We are scheduled here in the theater from 4 until 5:30. And we will go as long as there is interest in questions and comments. There is another event taking place here at 6 p.m., so we will have to clear out of here at 5:30 so that they can get things set up for the 6 o'clock event. But if there are other questions and discussions that need to go on, we'll carry those on outside of the theater here. And of course, we'll be happy to follow up with folks individually as we need to do that. So let me go through the agenda here. One of the reasons that we are here, it's not the only or sole one, but a compelling one, is we at the university have gone through with the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights an agreement with them, a resolution agreement with them that came from some complaints that came to that office about difficulty accessing some of our online content at the university. One of the items in that agreement is that we would do an annual public forum to discuss where we're at and what we're doing. That, I think, is an excellent idea and something that we perhaps should have been doing even beforehand. The university has been working on accessibility for online content for some time, but we're doing things now in a much more formal way. So I'll go through a little bit of the history of that, what brought us here, and what we're doing with that. Part of that was then a corrective action plan. You may hear some of the speakers referring to that as the CAP, but that's what that's for, and it's got an approved schedule. And we have put in a progress report to the Office for Civil Rights, and I'll go into a bit of the detail here. And we will tell you where we're at with that. And again, we'll go into more of the specifics on the training, on the web, on our software, on all of those items. And then really we want to open this up for questions and comments and dialogue with all of you that are here on this. So, back in October of 2016, the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights received a complaint. Actually, I think it was complaints on 3 different areas that the complaint said were inaccessible for university content. And we were contacted by the office, of course, as a public institution and as an institution that accepts federal dollars. We need to meet all of the federal ADA standards, both for physical and for our digital life here at the university. The university reached a resolution agreement with the Office for Civil Rights that was signed by the president right at the end of the year in 2016. There are a number of items in that resolution agreement that the university agreed to that we're moving forward. I was asked in my capacity as a CIO to help coordinate that effort that we undertook here. We immediately began to put resources into that, including 3 positions, 2 with our marketing and communications group who handle our official web presence, and 1 in our teaching and learning technologies group. And they particularly are concerned with instructional content and instructional technologies and training. However, both those groups have been working across sectors, so we're really not differentiating significantly between administrative and academic or research or all the areas the university's involved with. Accessibility doesn't have any boundaries in that regard. You'll notice there it talks about undue burden and fundamental alteration. This is standard language if you're familiar at all with the agreements that the Office for Civil Rights comes to with organizations like ourselves who are dealing with resolving a complaint for access. And what that means is we need to step up, meet the federal standards, the federal guidelines for accessibility, unless it represents an undue burden and fundamental alteration. And there's some specific language in the agreement on exactly what that means. But basically it says, you know, we can't carry on our day-to-day business if we have to adhere specifically to some of the areas there. We'll get into some of the details on that where this gets very complex very fast. For instance, things like chemical formula, mathematical equations. Some of those things become very difficult to make accessible in what we're doing. Also, there's a lot of software that's used in a university, particularly a research university. And a lot of that is not just commercial products, but it's freeware, shareware, community software. Those software products may not be going through any kind of rigor in terms of accessibility, but they are key pieces of software that are used that are critical for either research or academic purposes, instruction, in some cases even administrative things. And so the undue burden and fundamental alteration, we may not have some alternatives there. We're working through ways to accommodate that. The intent here, and I can't speak for the Office of Civil Rights, but I think that as I understand it from them, the intent here is that we're going to meet the federal guidelines. They want to ensure that public institutions like ours with federal funds are meeting those federal guidelines, as we should. And that is not only illegal, but in my opinion, an ethical responsibility. But at the same time, we have to have a certain amount of practicality in terms of the business that we're in, which is teaching and research and public service, and we need to carry on those activities. And so we have to find a meeting place where we can do that. As part of the agreement, we put in place some policies and procedures for new online content and functionality. You'll see the term functionality throughout this. What that really refers to, the functionality, is the software that you use to access the content, or the software that you use to do some sort of activity online. So this is not just the content that appears there. It is also the software that's used to access that content, to manipulate that content, to carry on different activities with that content. And the new policy went into effect on the 1st of July in 2017. Now, all of these things were built into the resolution agreement with the Office for Civil Rights. And so in each step of the way, as we had to draft that policy, the Office for Civil Rights took a look at it, and they gave us their agreement with that, or they said, we think you need to make some modifications here or there to move forward with things. We also need to identify an external auditor to come in and to look at our existing content and functionality. And again, part of the resolution agreement was that the Office for Civil Rights looked at who we had selected through the procurement process to come in and perform that audit. It was a company called Level Access, and they came in and they did an audit, and they gave us a report on what they found in terms of our content and our functionality. And because of that, we then, as a result, put together a corrective action plan to resolve that. And this involved the existing content that was there, but also procedures, methods, tools, personnel to handle new content and new software as we would move forward with that. We needed to put a notice up online about where people could go if they had problems or questions about accessibility. That was to be published on our web pages, and that notice went up fairly quickly there. We also engaged in training so that people who are creating content online have some knowledge on how they can create accessible material, how they can create and fix material that may be existing that is not accessible. And that training actually began fairly quickly there by March of 2017, before we even had all the policy in place. And many of these things we had been working on. The committee that I mentioned that I chair, the Information and Communication Technology Committee, was in existence and had been in existence for several years before all of this came about. That committee, among the things it was working on, it had draft language for the policy that we needed to move. What really happened was when this issue came about and the resolution agreement was signed with the Office for Civil Rights, it put us on a much stricter and accelerated timetable to move forward on all of these things. And it was at that time that we transferred the chairmanship of the committee over to me to kind of oversee us moving through with all of these things. So we submitted a corrective action plan to the Office for Civil Rights in September of 2017, and I'm sorry, let me step back for a minute. I got my dates wrong. We completed the audit in September of 2017. We submitted our corrective action plan after that, and in March of this year, 2018, the Office for Civil Rights said, okay, we agree with your corrective action plan, move ahead. And there's the dates that I've been talking about here. And again, all of these slides will be available so you can see where we're at and where we're going. This kind of takes us, this is the history. The more important thing are the future dates that we also have to meet moving forward here, and when we have to have content accessible, and when we have to be ensuring that we have practices in place that are going to continue with that ability to have content and the functionality accessible. We submitted our first report on our CAP plan in October of this year. We've kind of completed all of the original items under the resolution agreement. We're now into more of an operational mode. The ongoing obligation we now have with the Office for Civil Rights is every 6 months we submit to them a progress report. That first progress report, as you can see there, was submitted in October. They review that, they send back if they want any changes or corrections, or they find objection with anything in that, and then we move on, and so we'll have another report in another 6 months. We will continue to submit those reports until the Office for Civil Rights feels that we have met the obligations and that we're well on the road to where they want us to be in terms of accessibility for our online content. The first report was accepted pretty much as written, with a couple of minor but no substantive changes to that. So in summary, I've kind of given you a brief history, and again, I'll be glad to go back and go through much more detail if there's interest in that. We have an approved schedule from the Office for Civil Rights, and we're moving forward with that, and we're now into the process where we do our progress reports. Here are the deadlines that are critical for the university. So in January 1st of 2018, you can see that new content needs to be accessible. Instructional material, and that's existing instructional material. New material then needs to be accessible now. Instructional material that's existing that needs to be converted. And I will defer to my colleagues to give you much more detail on some of the issues there that we face. I gave you just a sample of that with things like the chemical formulas and mathematical equations. But our instructional material, we're shooting for a January 1st, 2019 deadline. These are dates that the Office for Civil Rights is going to hold us accountable for, and we need to show significant progress moving forward to that. December 1st, 2019, non-instructional websites and web content need to be accessible. And then we hope that our corrective action plan will have been completed by March 20th of 2020. That, there's two ways to look at that. On the one hand, that seems like an awful long time to make things accessible for folks that need to have accessible stuff right now. We should have had it yesterday. On the other hand, and we will get into some of the numbers of the vast quantities of content that we have there, the number of software titles that we have to look at, that's a fairly aggressive timeline to really meet those deadlines. And so we're moving through with that as best we can. We have a number of procedures in place to handle that and to handle exceptions when we run into them. To do that, let me go back again a little bit more detail on the accessibility deadlines. All new content and functionality must be accessible, and that is with our new content, which was the first of this year, particularly with our instructional content. And then all instructional material, that's the existing material, has to be accessible by January 1st of 2019. And then the non-instructional websites and web content need to be accessible. And this refers briefly, we have specific standards, guidelines that are in our resolution agreement that we need to meet there. The acronym that you see there, WCAG 2.0, means Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0. That is specified in our resolution agreement, and they have 3 different levels within those guidelines, an A, an AA, and a AAA. AA is kind of the intermediate level. Again, my colleagues can go into much more detail on what that is. Those were the specific levels that we need to meet in our resolution agreement. These are evolving. This is a very fluid kind of environment. There's already a Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.10 that came out July, guys, I think, of this year. We aspire to meet that, but we definitely will meet the ones that were specified there. And so we're working through that to meet those things. Here is kind of how we're set up with the university management. The policy that was put into place puts that final responsibility, so to speak, the buck stops at the desk of the office of the Executive Vice President and Provost. I'm actually part of the Provost's office, so that's why I'm here kind of coordinating things at this point. That may change in the future, but the policy is very explicit. It goes finally to the provost if there's issues there that need to be worked with. The staff, I mentioned we had some staff that we brought on board specifically to work on this, are in marketing and communications and teaching and learning technologies. That does not by all means mean the only staff working on this. There are other staff that were already working on these things, but these were new positions that the university brought on board very quickly after we became aware of this and signed the resolution agreement. The oversight and coordination does go through the committee that I've mentioned a couple of times. We meet regularly, and there are subcommittees there that are looking at the audit and making sure we're hitting all of the reports, and that we are staying on course with our agreement with the Office for Civil Rights. But more importantly, the agreement with the Office of Civil Rights says, here's the path you need to be taking. It's the right path that we need to do, but it's the path we should be taking anyway, and so they're just making sure that we're staying along on that path. We have a software subcommittee that's looking at issues, again, with that functionality. And there's a research and scholarly work subcommittee. That is looking at all of our content and the functionality, again, that exists outside of just the instructional side or the administrative side, the department, the college websites, the other official university websites. It's looking at all of the mass of content that any university has there, and working through how we're going to deal with accessibility for all of those materials. So that's kind of an overview of where we're at. I'm going to turn this over now to our colleagues. First will be Kalina Pelikai-Wai, and he's going to talk a little bit about our specifics on the progress reports.
Thank you, Steve. Adjust this real quick. Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Kalina Pelikai-Wai. I am the chair of the ICT Audit Subcommittee and the senior web developer with the Office of Marketing Communication. Today, I'll be talking a little bit about the audit subcommittee, some of the work that we've completed, and then I'll go into the key findings from our first progress report, and then I'll talk a little bit about the web accessibility compliance state and the resources that are available. So the audit subcommittee was formed in April of this year, and we were tasked with assisting with the monitoring and reporting of the university's progress towards accessibility compliance. Our committee was then tasked in July of this year to assist with the first progress report, and as Steve mentioned, subsequent progress reports thereafter. We're working on that 6-month schedule. Our progress reports list several of the key several of the key activities, that we've completed, that we were proud to report on, or that were of importance to presenting to OCR. One of those first progress activities, and tasks that we wanted to report on was our web property registry. So our web property registry is a list of all of the domains and subdomains that the university, whether it's a website or application the university uses. We group all of those by division, by college, by major unit, and we've managed that through the ICT audit subcommittee. So at the time of the report, we had over 220 domains and subdomains or websites being listed in our web registry. What was interesting to note when we created the audit report and we went through the process of reviewing the information was that between February and August of this year, we saw 100% growth in the number of sites that we were tracking. Now, not all of the sites that we are tracking can actually be scanned using our automated monitoring tool. So that tool is the Site Improve Intelligence platform, and it's a service that we subscribe to along with other institutions in NSHE. Another point where I was saying that we aren't able to scan all of our websites, but for the sites that we were able to scan, we've got about 79% of our web registry currently within Site Improve. Another key activity that we listed in our first progress report and that we reported to OCR on was our university website redesign and rebuild process. So one of the tasks and what we ended up reporting on was that the easiest way for us to remediate our university website was actually to rebuild it, redesign it from the bottom up to be accessible before it launches, during the launch, and thereafter. And then to put into place mechanisms to mitigate accessibility issues, and then to make sure that what goes up can be monitored and reviewed. So that process, the development and design of that is about 70% complete. The coordination for that is through the Office of Marketing and Communications. The web team, along with the digital marketing team, opened up the content migration portion of that in November of this year, so we're just starting to move that content along. And we expect to launch no later than the end of summer of 2019. And that's a deadline that we have listed in our approved corrective action schedule that OCR, that we submitted to OCR, and that we'll be needing to stick to. Another item I'd like to talk a little bit about from the progress report was the document. So one of the activities that was listed was that we create an inventory of all the documents across all of our web presence, or across all our web properties. And what we discovered was that there were over 42,000 total PDFs across all of our web properties and subdomains and domains. The university website had about 6,700 of those, and for the remaining sites, there are over 36,000. We also discovered through using Site Improve that about 23,120 of those, or about 54% of the total PDFs, were inaccessible. It's quite a high number, and we're working on remediating that or coming up with ways to convert that content. Moving on to videos, again, another task within our approved corrective action schedule was to develop an inventory of all the videos across our web presence. On the instructional and academic side, we discovered over 662 videos, and TLT coordinated to have 211 hours of those videos captioned. On the professional and administrative side, we discovered over 583 videos on the university's official YouTube and Vimeo accounts, of which 295 were captioned. And then on the embedded side, so these are videos that have been embedded with an iframe or some other technology into our web pages. There are over 1,700 of those across all of our sites. Now that I've kind of given you some of the key findings from our first progress report, I'd like to talk a little bit more about web accessibility and go specifically into the university website and our other websites. So on the university website, this is our current www.unr.edu. We discovered 23 level A issues, 2 level AA issues across 16,000 pages roughly. Now those numbers may seem small, but they actually represent more of a category of a type of issue. And each kind of level A issue can actually occur on one-to-many pages, And on those actual pages, you can see one-to-many occurrences. So you can have this exponential number of actual occurrences compared to the smaller kind of categorical number of level A issues. On the PDF side, we saw 5,000 inaccessible PDFs within the CMS, or our university website platform, and that represents about 75%, so quite a high number within the university website. On the video side, we saw over 270 embedded videos on the university website and its subsequent pages. For all other websites, we discovered 3,976 level A issues and 462 level AA issues across 218,336 pages. So you can imagine, we didn't do the exact math on that, but it's number of occurrences are in the millions. And that really speaks to the scale and scope of the issues for content and websites outside of our CMS. On the PDF side, we saw over 18,000 inaccessible PDFs out of our 36,000 total. So less overall out of our CMS, but still quite a large number as well. And then on the video side, we saw over 1,400 embedded videos. Inaccessible websites and web content that are not migrating into our CMS with our new build, so we provide that as an option from the Office of Marketing and Communication. Those websites are being handled by the colleges, divisions, or major units to which they belong. So Steve spoke a little bit earlier about some of the compliance dates for non-instructional content and functionality. The targeted date that we're going after is December 1st of 2019. That gives our audit committee some time to take a snapshot and then review that information so that we can make recommendations to the provost for enforcement, and then subsequently giving the audit committee enough time to write the reports before that March 2020 deadline. This deadline for non-instructional content will include any sites or software used for official university business, including faculty websites, as well as any public-facing content or functionality from third-party services. So to assist with communicating the information that we have within our automated monitoring tool, our audit committee has developed site improved accessibility reports. These reports are meant for web accessibility liaisons, which are designated within each college, division, or major unit, as well as the deans and vice presidents of each major unit. So the reports themselves kind of standardize our assessment methods. This is part of our goal, They report the information that can be overwhelming within Site Improve in a more transparent and easier to understand manner. We try to do that frequently as best as possible, and then send those out quarterly is what we would strive to do. So far, we've completed 18 out of the 22 planned reports, and we're hoping to be able to increase our output for those now that we've gone through this first round of determining what those reports should look like and what information is key for people to know. So last slide that I have for you guys today is just some web accessibility resources that are available both for content creators, website owners, and also for the public. So the accessibility website is going to be your key place of information. We're also working on a new version of that that's going to be easier to understand and provide the information in a much more consistent and usable manner with our new website build. So that's one of our key focuses. The second bullet point up there for training. So training is being provided currently partly through TLT for in-person training, and Ed will speak a little bit more about that in a bit. And we also have CMS and Site Improve training. And then we also subscribe to lynda.com, which is an online learning platform. And that is where you can find additional resources to learn about coding, to learn about web accessibility, to learn about how to convert certain kinds of documents. It's a very helpful and available to all university faculty and students and staff. If you're a Site Improve user, you also have access to the Site Improve Academy, which is another online resource, and it'll help walk you through some of the complexities that you can find or run into within the Site Improve platform. In terms of tools, as I was just mentioning, the Site Improve Intelligence platform is our automated monitoring tool that we subscribe to along with several of the institutions within NSHE. The Site Improve Intelligence platform offers a suite of services ranging from quality assurance to SEO to response times, but what we use it primarily for is for that accessibility piece. So it helps us get a better sense of the full scope of our issues, as you saw with the numbers. So all of the numbers that we were pulling are either from SiteImprove or through other manual methods. Additionally, SiteImprove provides online free Chrome browser extension called the SiteImprove Page Checker that assists with doing kind of more manual spot checking and kind of verifying issues that can sometimes be a false positive, possibly within SiteImprove. The Wave 2 is also another free Chrome browser extension that you can use and is commonly used to verify accessibility of a particular page. And the point I would add there is, as easy as it is for us to see the issues, it's also easy for other people because these are publicly facing. So these are the tools that you can use or somebody else could use to verify, a claim that we're making. Additionally, for technical guidance, I missed the point. Recently, the university acquired a site license for Adobe Creative Cloud, and with that license was the ability for all of our faculty members to use Adobe Acrobat Pro. So if you're ever remediate a PDF, which is quite a tedious task, it's not really that easy to do without Acrobat Pro. You really need that level of the Adobe Acrobat software to be able to fix the issues that are there. On the technical guidance side, if you're working with content within our university website or our CMS, and you need assistance with that, you can contact webhelp@unr.edu. We're asking that if you're working on another site that's part of your division or a software platform, if you need assistance or guidance with that you coordinate that with your web accessibility liaison. Again, there's one designated for every college and major unit, and that information is also available on our website as well. And that'll help kind of coordinate the communication so we're not receiving it from several people. And our audit committee finds it very helpful when we keep the liaisons in the loop as well, because they're usually in the loop with the deans and vice presidents as well. So we want to make sure that our communications channels are clear and we're not going to have miscommunication on that part. And lastly, if you're a faculty member, staff, or the public and you have any general questions or concerns, we have a form online through our accessibility website that you can use to submit a question. And if you have a help request, we also have one for that as well. So with that being said, I will introduce Ed Huffman, my colleague, and the Director of Teaching and Learning Technology to tell you more about instructional materials.
Thanks, Kalena. As he mentioned, my name is Ed Huffman. I am the Director of Teaching and Learning Technologies. The first thing I would just want to reiterate, and I know you've heard this a couple of times by now, is the compliance dates for instructional content. The date you really need to remember is January 1, 2019. After that date, any software you use in your class or any materials you use in your class need to be accessible. And that's where my unit comes in. We're here to be a resource and a support system for the faculty so they can make their instructional content and materials accessible. So that's one of the things that we're here to do. Some of the different resources that we have, the first one up there is Ally, and we got that approximately a year ago, and what that is an add-on for our learning management system, which is Canvas. And what it does is it does a few things. It actually provides more accessible versions of content that faculty members put in Canvas automatically. It also provides feedback for those faculty members on how accessible their content is. So it has little icons by each piece of content that tells the faculty member whether it's highly accessible or very inaccessible. One caveat to Ally is that it only works with materials that you place directly in the learning management system. So if you have a faculty website or something like that, it's not going to be able to reach those materials out there. So it's a very useful tool, but it needs to be leveraged within the learning management system. One last thing that it does that's useful is it provides, on the administrator level, a way to do reports and look at overall accessibility across the institution. One thing that will be coming soon in this product is the ability for faculty members themselves to look at their own course and get a report on that course and see how accessible that course is or is not. The next bullet is just really talking about my instructional design team, which is one of the units that makes up Teaching and Learning Technologies, and this is really the team that can help faculty members make their content accessible. We provide training and support, so if it's an assignment you need to rethink, or if you just really don't know how to approach it, come to my unit and we can make an appointment, set up a meeting, and talk through whatever it is you're having issues with. Also, we do captioning services for instructional content, so instructional video content. So if you have instructional video content that needs to be captioned, that is a service that we provide for you. You just need to email captioning@UNR, actually captions at unr.edu, excuse me, and just request what videos you need. We ask that if you have multiple requests for videos, that you try to put them in one email at a time, rather than send us 40 emails with 40 requests. That way it's just easier for us to track. The next thing that we really are in charge of in regards to accessibility is training. You can access all of the training courses that we offer on our website, tlt.unr.edu. One thing to point out that a lot of people aren't aware about our training is that any of the sessions that you see that we offer, we would be happy to do as a special session for your department. So if you have a department meeting and you have some time where you'd like to just get everybody squared away with basic web accessibility training, for example, we'd be happy to set that up for you. Just reach out to us. The general email for IDT is just idt@unr.edu. Kalena mentioned also that we've acquired Adobe Acrobat Pro. That is an essential tool for making your PDFs accessible. So every faculty member can now have that installed on their computer. If you need that installed, you can request it via the IT website. And my unit offers training on how to use Adobe Acrobat to make your PDFs accessible. One other thing, and I think Steve mentioned this briefly, is that we do acknowledge that there is quite a bit of content, especially in the hard sciences, that is hard to make accessible. So there is a committee that's been formed to look at things that cross into that area, and it's the Scholarly Research and Scholarly Works Committee. And it's looking at things like LaTeX, which is a product we get a lot of questions about. I see people shaking their head out there. So we're actively working on that and coming up with strategies for you to use to deploy that. We realize that in some cases it will be very hard to make that fully accessible, but we can do the best that we can, and we'll help you with that. Next thing I wanted to talk about real quick is ally reports. So Kalena mentioned that each unit will be getting reports talking about their web accessibility. We'll be following those up with ally reports, which will speak to accessibility within Canvas of the courses that are in Canvas. This graphic up here is actually from journalism, and what it doesn't show is accessibility over time. What it actually shows is the top 10 enrolled courses in journalism and their accessibility levels. So you'll see they're actually, for the most part, they're relatively high, except for that course on the end. And that one's their lowest one. So you'll see that there's, out of their top 10 courses, the majority of them are fairly accessible. And so we'll be sending these reports out to each department in the upcoming weeks, and they'll be going out to the deans of each of those units. Moving forward, we're going to try to combine those with the web report so each department gets one inclusive report on accessibility. Right now, it's just ours are a much more manual process to compile, and it takes a bit more time. We're working on getting that streamlined. Next, I want to talk a little bit more about training, what's out there that we offer, and where you can sign up for it. All right, so there's 4 main sessions that we offer related to accessibility. The first one is basic web accessibility, and that one is key, and that's one that basically everybody needs to take. It's laid out as a requirement. And there are some caveats, but for the most part, if you're a teaching faculty or if you put anything on the web, it's a requirement that you take that training. The other ones are more about creating different types of accessible documents or creating an accessible course within the LMS. You'll see the third one down, creating accessible PDFs. That really shows you how to use Acrobat Pro to create an accessible PDF. So I highly recommend that one. But basic web accessibility is really the kind of the cornerstone. So you really should start with that course first. We offer all of these sessions very frequently, and the basic web accessibility is offered at least once a week, with the other ones offered approximately every 2 weeks. As I mentioned before, we're happy to schedule special sessions to meet your needs and your department potentially. We can help you schedule a lab if you need one. So just know that that is a possibility and something that we're happy to do. This is something that I mentioned previously, training attendance. Based on our resolution agreement with the OCR, anybody that places materials on the web is required to take this training annually. And this is something that hasn't been effectively communicated potentially in the past, but this is a requirement that we have to report back to the OCR annually. One of the things that you can see the attendance numbers so far. So we got it started as Steve mentioned in March of 2017, and we had about 251 attendees that year. This year we are already at 546. One of the things that we're doing is we're actually going to create, and we are almost done with it, an online version of the training. And we realize that a lot of faculty teach remotely or don't have the opportunity to come to the sessions because they have busy schedules. So our hope is that the online version will allow more compliance and people to complete it without having to come to a face-to-face session. And that's everything that I had. I want to introduce Gary Livdolin, who is going to speak to you about procurement. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed, and good afternoon. Again, my name is Gary Livdolin. I'm the technology buyer in the purchasing department here at UNR. And I'm going to be sharing with you what the purchasing department is doing to work towards accessibility with software procurement. And let's see where we are here. So you get to me, there I am, all right. And all the slides you're going to be seeing are on the UNR accessibility website under procurement. So all these, I know there's a lot of words there, but you can go look at them later. But basically the policy is that the university procures ICT that is universal in design and accessible to all individuals, including individuals with disabilities. In the event this is technically infeasible or imposes undue burden, the university ensures an equally effective, accessible alternative. And then it lists the accessibility standards that must be met, which have already been talked about a little bit today. And so how do we implement that in purchasing? Well, first of all, we make sure that those accessibility clauses, those requirements are in our purchase order terms and conditions. And so what everybody gets every time they get a purchase order is saying you must be compliant. And every time we negotiate a contract, we put that accessibility clause into our contract. So all of our suppliers are contractually bound to comply with the accessibility requirements under the law. And also the job of the UNR purchasing department is really to act as the gatekeepers to make sure that no orders are issued until the accessibility process has been followed. And to do this, what we do basically is if we receive a request to obtain certain software, we have to check, first of all, the UNR accessibility website. There's a list on that website of all the software that's accessible. You guys can go on there and look at that as well. We look that up, see if it's on the site. If it's not on the site, we contact the department and we send them a link to that page and let them know they have to follow this process before their software is going to be approved and before their order is going to go out the door. So that's a big part of what we do, and then we work with them on that process. And I'm going to go through this process with you a little bit. So the process that's on that page that we send them is basically this. They need to, number one, gather some information in the required documents. Number two, submit it for the ICT review. And number three, the ICT does the review process. And so as far as gathering the information and required documents, what that really is we often talk about they have to fill out, the supplier has to fill out what's called a VPAT. And that's our term for the Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. And as it says up there, if when they fill that out, if they list some items that they only partially support or do not support, they must provide documentation indicating their intent to remediate the barriers and a timeline for their completion of the remediation. So when that document, after that's been filled out, the second part is, let's see if I can get here, they submit it for the ICT review. And basically, they just attach a form that, they fill out a form that they attach the VPAT to and send it up to the committee electronically. And then the third one is that it goes through the ICT review process. And so the committee will review the VPAT, and if the product is student or public facing, the committee may also do some internal UNR testing of the product. And that's some they do, some they don't, depending on the circumstances involved. But in any event, the VPAT is thoroughly reviewed, and the Accessibility Committee publishes a written report of their findings and recommendation for the next steps for that supplier. And that is just, this slide is just if there are some situations where they may not do internal testing. But here's the big one. What do you do if it does not meet, is not accessible? What do we do if the information communication technology request is not accessible? And basically what they need to do is there's three things they can do. One is they can develop an equally effective alternative action plan, affectionately called the EEAAP. You may hear that terminology around. And they submit that to the committee for review and approval. And this is to be used when accessibility is technically infeasible. The form is to address the known accessibility limits and to describe an alternative access plan for those that may have access to the software. The second option up there is to submit an alternative option. So if this software is not accessible, maybe they need to find another piece of software that will be more accessible and present that to the committee. Or then the third one is to submit an exception request for review by the committee. And to do what you have to do if you put in an exception request is you have to include these following elements. You have to put an explanation of the basis for your exception. You also have to have a reason and a research indicating why a competitor's product is not satisfactory. In other words, if there's a more accessible standard, why isn't it going to meet your needs? Thirdly, they need to list the number of people that may be involved, and so they know the impact of how many people may have to be following this alternative plan. And they have to give specific evidence of vendor commitment to explore modification to improve accessibility. And also, an approved EEAAP has to be in place, already approved when they submit their exception request, which says there's a way to have alternative access for people that do have disabilities. So, once purchasing receives notification that the product is accessible or that there's a approved EEAAP or an approved exception request, then we'll go ahead and place that order for the software. So we go through that whole process. And this is for new software, is what I was talking about before, but if it's a renewal of existing software, what we do is we go ahead and for the first initial renewal, we go ahead and renew it, but we send along a letter from Steve Smith saying that you're going to need, supplier, you're going to need to go through the UNR accessibility process by your next renewal. And we give them all the links to the website, and then we also send the department a notification that this letter was sent so they can work with their suppliers to help them become accessible before the next renewal period comes up with their software. So in the purchasing department, how we're helping to forward the accessibility for software is, number one, we're putting it in our contracts and our purchase orders, and then we're also acting as the gatekeepers to make sure the process is followed before the orders are issued. And so that's what I wanted to share with you today, and back to Steve Smith to wrap it up for you.
Thanks, Gary. Well, that was a lot of information in a short period of time. Now we want to open it up for questions and comments from all of you out there. I believe we've got a couple of folks with microphones. We would appreciate, as you have something you want to ask or comment on, that you wait till the microphone gets to you, since we are recording this, so that we've got that recorded and everybody can hear that.
Hi, I work for the Reno School of Journalism, and you said, one of you mentioned that every faculty member, if they're posting something to the web, will need to take the basic accessibility training. So that means even if they're only posting inside of, I shouldn't say it like that, if they're posting inside of Canvas as well, they'll need to take that accessibility training. Yep. And then, okay, that's great. So that's a yes? Okay. And then my other question is, what about student work posted for a class, but it's posted on the web? Do we know, does that have to meet accessibility guidelines?
If it's publicly available on the web, then it's going to need to be made accessible because it's publicly available. If it's behind something like Canvas, then we usually don't require student work to be accessible. But again, because it's being put on the public web, that's what triggers the need to be accessible.
And as far as what resources will you have for students to help them? You know, obviously our professors can do their best, but you know, that's a lot of students.
Basic web accessibility training is open to anyone. And then again, like I said, we can schedule special sessions. So if there's a class period potentially that the instructor wants us to come in and do a basic web training, we'd be happy to do that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions, comments?
The same thing about the training. Is the annual training the same thing every year, or does it get better, more complex?
It's just like sexual harassment. It's the same thing. It's kind of repetition. It's the way that the OCR required it as an annual thing. So that's why we want to make it online. So just like sexual harassment, you don't have to go to the classroom every time, but you do have to go through and acknowledge that you understand the basic concepts.
Will there be more complex courses?
Yeah, we intend to roll some out. Right now, we've just been kind of swamped with the basic ones. But I think over time, as that settles down a bit, we will probably roll out some more advanced ones.
And I have one more question about the rollout of the next website. Like on our website in the music department, there's one page for students that is a list of national organizations that are about music. When the new site comes through, will those be tested or have already been tested? And
So the way that our automated monitoring tool, SiteImprove, works is we need to submit, and part of why we have the registry as well is we need to submit every URL, every root URL, every homepage of every website that we need scanned. It doesn't do it automatically for things that we don't tell it. Now we can add aliases and configure it in a way to include other sites that you're interested in. But generally, we're using our automated monitoring tool to look at websites or web content either created by or on behalf of the university or through some kind of contractual relationship, as Gary was mentioning, if it's something we purchased, a software service. But if it's a third-party website like news and that kind of thing where we don't really have control over it, it doesn't necessarily fall under us to monitor that particular piece because we can't change it. It's someone else's content. Now, the caveat I'll say there is it is important to think about what content you're linking to and to make sure that you're linking to the most accessible versions of those content, especially if it's going to be shared with students and the public and that kind of thing. You want to consider the most accessible option and link to that, and also kind of advocate for the most accessible solutions to be used as well. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
What is MARCOM's relationship with our journey through accessibility? I've heard that name thrown out there. I'm just not familiar with it.
So I can talk a little bit about that. As Steve was mentioning the 3 positions that were allocated, one of those positions was mine. I'm the senior web developer. We also have a senior web interface designer. And then Don Massey from TLT is the 3rd position. So on the marketing and communication side, right now our primary focus has been the remediation of the current UNR website, working with departments, working with colleges, working with divisions to give them the information necessary so they can determine how compliant their sites are and how compliant their pages are. We also provide one-on-one training or small group training for SiteImprove and direct people that way. And then with the new university website, we've been heavily involved, and actually the person with the microphone is my supervisor, Dion Colbert-Clausel. He's the director of web development. And our goal with the new university website, as I was mentioning earlier, is to build an accessible website from the start, right? So it's going to be accessible before it goes live. We're going to be able to verify it. We're going to be able to report on it. When it goes live, it will be accessible. And then after it's live, and once we have content creators in the actual system and creating content, that we're ensuring that the content that that they create and that we allow them to post up on the web is as accessible as possible. So one of the ways we're doing that is we're kind of changing the philosophy behind how we do a little bit of the web authoring currently in our current university website, and moving more to a component-based system in the new website. So that component, it's been thoroughly checked for accessibility compliance, and we've tried to run through all the possible scenarios and all the options that we give you. We're manually checking ourselves to make sure that it reduces the amount of any possibilities for accessibility issues to happen to absolute minimum.
Just to add a little bit to that, so one of the things that happens with Site Improve is that it scans automatically, but it does not find everything. So what we do with the new website is we are checking every single component manually with the keyboard. So that's one of the key factors of making sure that it's accessible, that you need to be able to access all the content on a web page just using only your keyboard. So we are actually doing that with every single component that we create to make sure that you can access all the content on that page just using the keyboard. So we are taking that on and then getting everyone, as many people as we can, to come into the CMS. Right now we have several divisions and units outside the CMS, and they are planning on coming into the CMS with this new version. And it's still open to anyone else that wants to come into the CMS. You're definitely welcome to come in. If you have a website that's outside the CMS and you want it to come into CMS, where it's more, templatized, but it's also very open to customize so that you can have a little bit different look.
And I would also add that one of the other things we're doing on top of testing with keyboards is testing with screen readers, other assistive technologies, and ensuring that as we move a particular task, in our case, if we're building a component, through our development process, that from the beginning, we know what our goal is, we know visually what we want it to look like, we've checked the colors, we've checked the design, making sure that it's accessible, the output is accessible. Then we move it through the development process and we check it there. Then we move it into our specific kind of quality assurance testing phase and we check it there. Then it goes live and Site Improve checks it again. And we circle that process over and over. And we also do it as we introduce new components to our system. We check the system as a whole. And that's kind of where our focus is at. Currently, a lot of our time right now, besides assisting with the reporting process and the ICT committee, has been on that new university website. But previously, we spent several months actually just remediating the current university website. So as part of the audit that was done, there were some things that were pointed out, and we went after those high impact issues first. Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
So if I'm not sure if my document is fully accessible, could I reach out to the web help to see if they can double check some of our documents if we're not sure we met all of the requirements, if Site Improve can't locate everything? So
one of the things we do with the Site Improve reports that I mentioned is we list the total number of PDFs that were within a particular college, and we can get more or college or division or major unit. We can get more granular and do that by department. We're happy to set up those reports as well. And what we'll do is set up an automated report so that for your particular division or maybe your particular pages, which documents, which PDFs are inaccessible. And then for the remediation of that, we can help guide you to the resources that you can, whether it's the in-person or online training, for step-by-step kind of how do you resolve it or remediate it, and what standards you need to meet, because there's in-software kind of accessibility checking, and then there's other tools. And so we can provide some guidance on those other tools as well, of how do I use them to verify. So, those are the resources that are available for that. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Oh, yes.
I guess my question's more specific to instructional
Mhm.
materials and protocol, I guess, or accountability for faculty if they aren't consistently posting accessible materials. Kind of, I know you mentioned reports to the dean, but you know, what, I guess, could you speak more
So
to
you're,
that?
it sounds like you're asking about consequences, so to
Well, not
speak,
or just who we would, you know, refer to if materials were consistently inaccessible.
My unit doesn't want to be the police, we want to be the helpers. That being said, if there is a problem, generally what happens is it's reported to Steve, and Steve will try to take some intermediate action. If that doesn't resolve the issue, then it gets elevated to the provost. Then the provost talks to the faculty member's dean, and they take action from there. So it's kind of outside of my area, but if there's a continual problem, there are mechanisms to take action to correct that problem. Did that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions?
In terms of web forms and like data submission, where are we with that, and is there going to be additional training and
I don't know who wants to talk
things
about
along
web
those
forms.
lines?
So we are looking at the form stack solution, expanding the licenses for that to be able to provide that as the kind of preferred solution for web forms. Previously, you might have heard it was an option that was looked at was Jadu as a accessible form solution. Currently, Marcom kind of coordinates some of the major forms that are being used, but some of the departments also have their own instances of FormStat that they're using. But we're finding that that's the option that we're leaning most towards, and hopefully the expansion of those licenses will kind of give everyone the, you know, provide for enough users to be able to get everyone's needs taken care of. Any other questions? So I will turn it back over to Steve. Oops.
Just to follow up on the forms, the form stack went through the same validation process that we go through with all the software, and we had hoped to have it available campus-wide, but we had to, it takes some time to go through that validation process, and we finally got through that and said, yeah, this meets the criteria, and so we move it out there. And then speaking again of the software, I would caution anybody at the university with the software. Gary presented kind of the process we go through. Unfortunately, there doesn't exist at this point a central clearinghouse that we can go to that says, yeah, this software is accessible, it's been tested, and you can count on that. We need to go through a validation process, and as Gary kind of outlined, the threshold is if it's public-facing, if it's for all of our students, that's got the highest rigor that we need to make sure it's accessible. It goes down from there, but we need to make sure, our goal is to make sure that all of our software is going to be accessible. Now, when we get down to software that only a handful of people are using, you know, we may end up going through that at a less rigorous process, but still go through all the process and document that we've looked at it. But where I'm going with all of this is it's labor intensive. It will add days and weeks literally, to your procurement process for software. And so those of you at the university who are in the process of acquiring software want to add in that extra time. We're dealing with that now to see if there are additional human resources that we can add to that process to help shorten that timeline. but it's going to be a challenge. Gary mentioned the letter that goes out on software renewals. Just talking with him before we started here, so far this year, about 70 of those letters have gone out. If that software renewal time comes up and it's due July 1st, you don't want to wait until June 1st to say, oh, let's see if we can get this software go through the accessibility validation. So just a cautionary note there. This is a very human resource intensive process that we're going through. Well, if there are no other questions, I want to thank all of you for taking your time to be with us today. As I mentioned at the beginning, this has been recorded and it will be available. I can't give you an exact date, but it'll be available, I would say, if not this, by the end of this week, certainly next week online. And the link will be there on the university's accessibility webpage. If there are other questions that you have, you've seen kind of the principles here to talk with, but don't hesitate to contact me. Depending upon the nature of the question, I may defer to my more knowledgeable colleagues, but I will be happy to entertain any questions or comments and make sure that we get an answer to you. Thanks again. Enjoy your evening.